While discussion around the representation of women in positions of leadership continues to simmer, there is a question that emerges. What will it take to bring Australia on target? Today we take this opportunity to examine the debate on targets versus quotas and the respective merits and strategies around these areas to promote women into leadership roles in the workplace. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our esteemed panel for this evening. Ms. Tracey Spicer. Ms. Angeline Achariya, General Manager at Mondelez Australia and one of our proud mentees.
Yay! Shall I come next to you? Yeah, come there.
Mr. Guido Kuehnelt, CAO Staples Australia, one of our proud mentors. And Mr. George Horton, Senior Vice President and Country Head of HCL Technologies. Michael, my apologies. Michael George Horton. I'll now hand over to Nell Wilson to take the discussion forward, and we invite all of you to participate in the discussion. Maria and Melissa, who have been instrumental in the background during this program, are carrying the microphones around as they yell out. Pop your hand up.
I'll start with our esteemed panel. You get the first cab off the rank, and I must say you're a very hard act to follow, Tracey, so bear with us as we try and turn the evening into something a little bit more formal. So there's been significant discussion and research around the world around this theme that Tracey mentioned with targets and quotas. And whilst many organisations discuss the concept, many resist. And perhaps there's a perceived fear that such an approach will work against meritocracy. And the current status quo does appear to need something to happen in order to shift the current numbers. So I'd love to hear the perspectives of our panels, both your experience individually or the organisations that you've worked with, around the theme of targets and quotas. What are the pros and what are the cons? And then we'll turn to the audience for some perspectives as well. So whoever would like to kick us off first.
I'll jump in. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, so when it comes to quotas, within HCL ourselves, we don't have quotas as such, but we definitely measure it. Some of our customers have quotas, of which they expect us to take up the quotas. And with myself, I originally thought about the quotas and I was looking on the negative side of it, thinking this isn't a good thing because it's forcing people into positions that perhaps they're not qualified for or not ready for, and therefore it's unfair on the person, the outcome's not going to be good, and so I was looking at the negative side of it. But then yesterday, we're going through a recruiting phase at the moment, which we always do, and a senior position that we're recruiting for, and the recruiter came forward with the final 10 list. And there'd never been any discussion in any of this recruitment process around quota. Mm-hmm. But out of that 10, sure enough, there's 8 men and 2 women. And the 2 women, one of them, we couldn't take anyway because it was a customer's person that had been put forward. And the recruiter knew that, but she was still in the list. And the other woman was clearly underqualified for the role. So it was pretty obvious that the recruiter had thought, okay, we better put a bit of a mix in here, and he did his best. And so straight away you think the negative side of it, but then I thought about it, but what has actually happened here is the recruiter was thinking about it, and I was also thinking about it because I was thinking about him thinking about it. And so what that really means is I think there's a positive on it because the awareness is up, and what it does mean is that we're ready for when the women are coming through and are going to be qualified, and the awareness and the thought will be there already for us in that. So that was my view.
Probably from my perspective, you know, I think there's 2 levels to it. There's the society level around enforcing a quota, and then there's the company, and you can work on both levels. And I think it's very encouraging that you know, there's internationally a lot of movement in this arena. We had, I think it was 2 or 3 months ago, interesting enough, both Germany and I think Japan at the same time decided to introduce a quota of 30% of female members on the boards. By, I think there's a year lead time to get there, and the agreement is if you can't fill the role, then the role just stays empty. So, and I think it requires that. I think I thought before that maybe, you know, over time people become more aware of the gender gap, and just through that awareness, managers will start filling the roles with females, but I don't think that is going to happen. We saw 1985, we saw 2015, society moved on, but the quotas haven't moved on. So, you know, I think Australia needs a similar setup, and that will bring a movement about. And it's not starting with the 50-50 because it's probably unrealistic, but you need to have a start, and it will move up over time. At the company level, so I'm working for Staples Australia, New Zealand, global company. We have a strong focus on you know, equality in our workforce, but it is also a challenge. I lead the IT team. I currently don't have any female leaders in my team, and I regret that. And I have 2 female colleagues with me today, Nicole and Hilda, one of our strong female leaders in the company, and my commitment is to work on that. And by making a commitment to recruit, despite perhaps not that broad talent base to choose from, but you got to give it a start, and then you build critical mass, and then I think we will get there. But I do believe it also requires a broader quota setup from the society, regulation.
I'll carry on the line then. From my perspective, I guess, you know, I'll probably reflect more from my career progression to date, and I guess I've never really come across where I've felt that as a woman and a female that I was actually signalled out or didn't actually have the opportunities. I'm a big believer in hard work and merit. At the same time, I absolutely do advocate that I think if we don't do something in this country, we'll probably be here 10 years down the track and still saying the same thing. So how do we actually start to actually move that? I think the UK with the, well, I think they've just said 20% or 30%, and then, you know, Germany has also done that. I do believe that we should have programs that actually encourages young females as they're, you know, going through their career to start to actually have a line of sight. And a number of times I find that when I'm even leading my team, which is predominantly female, which is fantastic, but one of the things when we start talking with them around their development plans is they actually don't know what it is that they want to do. They don't have a clear line of sight, whether in the organisation they're working in or through the industry sector that they're in, on how do they actually start to go through that progress. So I think having a quota for me would actually signal probably the motivation that someone would need who's coming through their career path, but also be able to see exactly how do I actually get to this point. So I'd love to start the quota.
I'd like to concur with everything that everybody said. I just want to, I suppose, give you all a little bit of ammunition. If anyone tries to come back at you, if you're talking about quotas and someone says, oh, but I believe in merit, I don't believe in quotas. There is no such thing as a meritocracy. It might as well be in Disneyland next to Fantasyland, Meritocracy Land, where everybody is treated equally. It just doesn't exist. You know, people, we all have biases that, of course, we can't identify them within ourselves without training because we're too close to it. So once you recognise that there is no such thing as merit, that's when you can go back to the discussion about quotas. Well, what is wrong with quotas then? There are things that are holding women back, and to get them to that level playing field, there has to be legislation and action within companies.
Thanks, Tracey. I appreciate that point of view because I think it's often used as the reason why progress can't be achieved, and also the commentary is often that a target or a quota is not a temporary measure. You know, there's lots of examples of countries who have applied a temporary measure in order to achieve a greater result, and then that measure hasn't been necessary to be sustained over a longer period of time. I wonder, in the experience of each of you, what have you seen work, regardless of targets or quotas? What other programs, initiatives have you seen work that have helped foster greater equality and more of a percentage of females in leadership roles within your own context? Do you want to talk to that for a moment?
We had some discussion earlier out at drinks about this, and particularly around the experience within HCL. And I think HCL, being an Indian company and also in the IT industry, it is very different. So first of all, IT is absolutely terrible at gender equality. It's one of the worst industries. And I was hauled into a similar sort of event a couple of years ago, also with the Minister for Prisons at the time, because they also we were the two worst industries. I don't know how the mining industry missed out on it, but they weren't dragged in. We were the only two men in the room. So IT is very bad. And then Prerna, who's the key organiser and pusher from the HCL side of things, our first conversation was around, because we wanted to do this event, and where did HCL Australia sit in the global context for gender equality? And she's very cheery as always, and she said, "Yes, Mike, you're the worst." So we're the worst in the worst industry, so the numbers are very bad. But when you have a look at HCL in India, particularly in the younger ranks, the numbers are very good. And Prerna's just walking there. But I think the numbers are close to 40% or something like that, Prerna, are they? But in the younger ones coming through, it's much higher, isn't it? Yeah. 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 So within the HCL context, in the global, and particularly with India, it is naturally occurring because the women are naturally being attracted into the IT area because it's a very good work. It's good for them to get work. It's a good way for them to get work. The families are all very supportive. And the point I'm probably trying to make is that as a company in India, it's much further ahead than we are here in Australia, a long way ahead. And if we keep going the way we're going in Australia, it's going to take a long time to turn around. And I think there's a lot to learn from India and from HCL.
Guido?
Practical programs, Staples has been running a program which is called Businesswoman of the Year. That is a peer-nominated program that acknowledges leaders at different levels, and we really take them through a program of acknowledging their achievements, then bring them together in the head office. There's a training program associated, and so it's kind of a multi-phase program that creates a lot of awareness around it. So that's one of the ways to appreciate.
Yeah. Angeline?
I guess from my perspective, what I've seen work is actually having a very clear objective in the organisation that says this is what you want to go after. So when we talk about diversity, there's a number of diversity channels. But I remember one time when I was at Fonterra, and we actually led a women's program, and it was quite an interesting approach that we took. So it was top down, and yes, it was KPI driven, so that just meant that you actually got the buy-in all the way along, and that actually helped. One of the other things we made it was both formal and informal. So you actually had the opportunity to just network informally over lunch, women to women or mentor-mentee relationships. And I still actually mentor someone from that. And even though we've both changed jobs, funnily enough, we're both actually now working at Mondelez International. So we still do catch up over coffee. And I think that's a great example of how you can do it in a formal, but also, actually have some KPIs that actually do force that in the organisation. Otherwise, it just has become almost a bit of a talk fest. I guess,
lip service, absolutely. Tracey?
That's a great point. This Women in Media group that I convene, it's finally national. We've got every state on board. We do networking, mentoring and sponsorship, which is brilliant. But I have to say, being somewhat of a freelancer and working a bit here and a bit there in different organisations, what I've really noticed in the last 2 years is the growth of really powerful look, you could call them secret sororities. I'm talking about groups of very high-powered women in different industries where I'm invited along to either give a speech or MC or do some media training, and these women for the last year or 2 years have been connecting and not necessarily telling anybody, not making a big deal out of it, but supporting each other. These are women at the top of the coal and the oil industries, you know, like we said before, mining, IT, media, a lot of the male-dominated industries. You've got these women that are doing really powerful high-end networking, creating these kind of girls' clubs, you know, instead of the traditional boys' clubs, and I think that is incredibly powerful.
I'd love to hear, I know that some of you have finished your main meals, but I'd love to hear if there's anyone from the audience who'd like to tip in some of their own experiences within their organisations. What have been some of the strategies that you've seen work, some of the initiatives and programs of work that have seemed to have made a difference to the level of leadership and equality within those organisations? Would anyone like to tip in? Thanks, Gavin.
Gavin Fox-Smith from Johnson & Johnson. I'll stand up.
Thanks, Gavin.
I think the minute you think of it as an event or as a program, we've lost the point.
Yeah.
It's actually about changing culture. And I think I'm lucky enough to work for an organisation that has in our credo, many of you would have read about our credo at Johnson & Johnson. It was written in 1943. And the second paragraph talks about our people. And the phrase equal opportunity is in there. So we come from a deep-seated culture around equal opportunity. I wish I could tell you we have perfect statistics. We don't. But we have very good statistics globally. We have incredible statistics in the US. We're very fortunate in Australia to have really great statistics. But it's really the culture that matters. And the culture comes from the top, but it's executed within the organisation. And where do you get women leaders from? You get women leaders from exactly the same place you get men leaders from. They actually come from the same place. And women leaders and men leaders are actually, good women leaders and good men leaders are just good leaders. And you need to have career programs, you need to have job roles, you need to have flexibility, you need to have all that stuff going in place. But I think the minute we think about it as an event or a program, it's not going to work. You really need to change the culture in your organisation. And that the whole thing of unconscious bias, I think there is a massive thing on unconscious bias that we need to, we've identified that. We're going to put our 90-odd people managers through unconscious bias training this year, because it's actually those first-line leaders that ultimately determine how good your talent pipeline is. And if they are truly hiring with no bias, you will get a very balanced workforce.
Thanks, Gavin. Would anyone else like to contribute some thinking behind what goes on in their organisations? Yes, thank you, Karen.
Because the boy stood up, I'm going to stand up too.
Fantastic.
Karen Wolfe, I work at the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation. Thank you very much for this program, it's been wonderful. We are, because we're nuclear, because we're science, because we're technology and engineering, we're extremely male heavy in the leadership roles. But the secret that we have found is that we have a CEO who's strongly committed. He built a childcare centre on site so that we not only have women who can bring their kids, but men who can take the responsibility too. So we're giving back to the community as well. So we're empowering women outside of our organisation to actually have a career and a lifestyle. But the other thing that we're doing is we're infecting like amoebic dysentery through the organisation. My compadre here is Alison, who's actually the chair of our gender equity program, and we went to a program a couple of years ago, and what really struck us about the program is there's a lot of really empowered women who've got amazing stories, and I think every woman in this room would have an amazing story. But what struck us was that everybody just stood up and told the same story. Only one woman stood up and said, and the difference I made in my organisation was. And so we were committed that that wouldn't be our story, that we were going to go back and make a difference in our organisation. So we've got Peter here, who's on our Gender Equity Steering Committee. We've got a group of executives and dynamic people across the organisation who are actually pulling apart everything. Our CEO gave us a mandate saying we have no sacred cows. Look at what's our barrier. Look at what we need to do. Look at what we need to change. Now, it's not going to be easy because it's a male-dominated world. You know, we've got to get people coming through. We've got to change the culture. We've got to break down a lot of barriers. But we have a mandate to do it. We've got highly empowered men and women who want to do it across all the levels. And we have representation. The whole program itself is a development program because we've got people at all levels who are taking a leadership role, talking to executive, talking to our board members who are coming in to talk to them, so they're actually getting that development program going right across. And to people who say, I don't believe in quotas, I say bullshit, because I think the most patronising thing you can say to me is, dearie, when you got the skills, I'm going to give you a job. Well, piss off with that. Give me the skills and I'll do the job and I'll knock your socks off.
Nicely said, Karen. I remember when I first met Karen and she had a wonderful way of describing herself, which I hope she doesn't mind me sharing, which is that she's frank and fearless. Do we agree?
Yes.
I think we might. She's a rock star. The other theme I'd like to talk about is about participation. And at the G20 summit in Brisbane last year, there was an agreement signed by all of the G20 countries that they would increase participation by 25% by 2025. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of teeth behind that strategy that was set last year. So I'd be curious to hear from the panel, not just about supporting women in leadership roles, but what do we need to do to create more participation for women in the workforce? Anything that you'd like to share that you've seen work and share with the audience this evening? Thanks, Mike.
All right, I'm going to use an example that I spoke about earlier tonight, and where's Parul? Are you okay if I speak about how things work at, yeah? All right. So Parul works for us at HCL and is a very key member of our financial services team. And what works well, that I can see works well, is Parul's got young children, very young children, and she's got a full-time job. Like, I seriously rely on Parul. And everyone in the office knows that Parul's a mother, and they know that, and I've heard this said, that we don't organise meetings that need Parul at the meeting after 4 o'clock in the afternoon because she needs to go, because she goes, picks up the children, she organises the home first and then picks up the children. But the point I'm putting across, what works, is that no one thinks anything abnormal about that. They just say, we can't organise the meeting after 4 o'clock. You see the guys nodding because they know that's what happened, because they know she's got to go at 4. And I think that, and that's acceptance of that. And I think that's really helpful, and I'm sure it's helpful for Parul, but we need more of that, and we need more of the women that are accepted and the people around them just treated as normal.
May I just jump in there? I think we also need to have it accepted that men do that as well. I've got a big, hairy, farty husband who is just one of those really weirdly masculine kind of characters. So it absolutely shocks people when we were working at Channel 10 together, and he would always, he was the head of department, say, I've got to leave because I've got to pick up the children. And he'd bring the children and the reality of being a working father into the workplace. And because he was that kind of uber masculine character, the young men in his department really took it on board, and they felt comfortable asking for time off for paternity leave and to be hands-on with their children and to talk about their children and talk about picking up their children. I also think we need to talk about the business case for this, which is if we have equal male and female participation in Australia, our GDP goes up 11%, which is more than $25 billion. It's a no-brainer.
I'll respond back to that. Because the same does happen for the men in the office who have young children. So, and Vishal Bakshi won't mind me mention, he's not here. He's got young children, he needs to pick them up, and his wife has just gone back to work. And I think they do day about, don't they, for all to pick up the children? Yeah, they do, yeah. The same thing, so, and it's accepted. But again, I think this is something that is more about the Indian culture than the traditional Australian culture, because this is my opinion and my experience is I think that the Indian fathers are more family conscious than the Australian background fathers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There was a recent study out of the US last year with some of the top tier consulting firms that some of the younger male leaders were pushing back against doing the 100-hour weeks to the more senior partners within those organisations, saying we actually want to participate in the raising of our children. And the, what do you call it, the stale, male and pale, senior leaders were saying, well, we didn't, and so therefore you have to follow in our footsteps. So I'd be really interested if there's anyone in the audience who knows of what happens in their organisations to encourage men to take advantage of flexible work conditions. Has anyone got any examples that you'd like to share that would be helpful for all of us to learn? Yes, down the front there. Thanks, Amanda.
Hi everyone, I'm the Managing Director of Mondelez, which is, you might know better as Cadbury Craft. And again, thank you so much for including Angeline in the programme. Thank you to Guido and to Nell for the fantastic support you've given her. We in Mondelez are very focused on making sure that we get the best from the workforce by having a really good diverse mix. Actually, if you look at our regional performance, again, similar to J&J, we're in quite a happy position, and it has been for a long time a real priority. So we say every year that we will set a target for male-female diversity, and then people only get paid their bonus right across the whole global network if that is improved by 100 basis points versus the year before. So it's really kind of making people accountable throughout the entire organisation, which I think then comes back to themes like quotas, because then actually people locally will decide what's the most appropriate strategy. But in terms of involving men in the conversation, I think that as we think about strategies for this region in particular, where we've got such diverse country start positions really, we have found that it's incredibly important to really be talking with men and encouraging them to take the lead if we're really going to make a change. So we're really having a conversation right across the region at the moment about themes like, how do you create core working hours which enable people to have a life outside work? And how do you also minimise those core working hours so that people can have the flexibility to perhaps leave at a point in time, come back online later and re-engage? And I think that's particularly relevant for any of us who are trying to manage organisations across the region where you're also dealing with time differences. So that's been something that we've very deliberately included. Well, we've actually kind of driven that conversation, not as a gender issue at all, but of course it's really helping with our diversity and inclusion. So I think that's one critical thing. The other thing, honestly, we've absolutely encouraged men to take advantage of the flexible working hours that we started offering women for maternity. And we've proactively driven paternity leave as a really good way of getting men starting to role model that it's okay to come and say, I'm going to take some time off to be with the kids. And I think in the end, you know, the more men who can stand up and lead on this for us in the organisation, that's how we change the culture the fastest.
Yeah. Thanks, Amanda. I think the thing I'm really struck by is that each one of us have a voice and can be part of this conversation in our workplaces. And you know, leadership is a verb for me, and how much can we exercise more leadership around these themes, create more conversation, perhaps create a little bit of disequilibrium and challenge the status quo, but start having slightly more deeper, more richer conversations around the strategies and solutions that are perhaps ones that we haven't thought of or might on first glance think couldn't possibly work. So thank you so much for those ideas and for the contributions from the audience. I'd like to just briefly turn our attention to the reason we're here this evening, which is our mentors and our mentees. And in particular, I'd like to hear from our mentees about something that's really stood out for them in terms of what they've gained from the program. Angeline is prepared for this question, hence why she's sitting on the stage, but it will give the other mentees a moment or two to think about whether or not they'd like to tip something in for the rest of the audience about what you've gained personally from the experience. So Angeline, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, fantastic. So firstly, I was very, very honoured to be part of the program. I think, you know, when I first heard about it, and I remember meeting Prerna and Chauvin in a meeting at South Wharf in our offices, and I just couldn't believe what HCL was doing. So for me, personally, actually, the 13 weeks was fabulous in terms of, I don't think it was too short, and Guido and I have had this conversation. I think it was just right enough for me to actually really personally make sure that I could actually make some good headway in the objectives that I had. And like any ambitious woman that are around in this room, I had 3 full objectives. They're all very, very different as well. But it actually forced me to, as I say, give me a kick up my ass at the end of the day, I guess, to start to really make sure that I was really focused. But it also allowed me to be quite proactive in my approach. So rather than thinking about, so one of my objectives was actually around a broad career path in the future. And I've been toying with this for a while. My husband knows that. I've been dilly-dallying, thinking about it. And what this program really allowed me to do was to explore that as a much broader level, but also actually ask my question, the question to myself, am I really serious about this? And therefore, what are you going to do about it, Ange? So I'm really happy to report I'm about to go and sign off and do my AICD course in a couple of weeks. So, and I've actually put in some applications for some board roles as well. So we'll see how we go. But it's really allowed me to focus. I think that's probably the big thing for me.
Fantastic. Well done. And before I turn my attention to the other mentees, I'd actually like to ask Guido a question. One of the things that's funny, or not funny, but powerful about a program like this is that the male mentors in particular get a very particular insight into the experience of women leaders. What are their obstacles? What are some of the things that they're challenged or excited by? And hopefully so that they can take that learning back into their own organisations, a perspective that can be taken forward. I'm wondering, Guido, what you gained in terms of your perspective working with Angeline.
And certainly I have to start with saying how blessed I was to have that pairing. So whoever made that match was a perfect match. So thank you for that. We share also an interest in innovation, so it was interesting on multiple levels. But it was interesting to work with Angeline. I think, so Angeline is actually an environment which is very female empowered.
Yes.
You're leading a team of female leaders. You have support from Amanda as a female role model. But I think then it's about the assertiveness and the self-confidence and yes, I can do it. And let's plan for it, take it step by step. I think that's the topic that in the end we talked about through the 3 goals that we worked on. The program for me also is, as a mentor, it's you learn as much as a mentee. So so thank you for having all the conversations. So that was a good experience for me as well.
Thanks, Guido. Come on, mentees, this is your time to share some of your learnings. We've got somebody over here. Fantastic. Thanks, Karen.
So I'm Karen Green, a partner at Deloitte, and this wonderful gentleman here has been my mentor, Gavin Fox-Smith. I think the big change for me over the 13 weeks, and you touched upon it, Tracey, when you talked about those mining women who are quietly getting together and networking. If that was a group of blokes, they'd be shouting it to the world and everyone would be knowing about it. As females, we sometimes don't have that confidence and that focus to push ourselves and tell people what we've achieved. So Gavin's really given me that confidence and focus on what I do want to achieve, and that was to get on some more boards. So just this week I got appointed to a ministerial advisory council for the Department of Business in the Northern Territory. So hopefully that's
very good.
So thank you, Gavin. You've had a huge impact.
Thanks, Karen. That's wonderful news. And I think, as many would attest on the program, that sometimes just that opportunity to socialise their thinking outside their workplaces, outside their context, to be a safe harbour, to talk about things that are on their mind, has been a great aid for their own progression and development. Would anyone else like to tip in something about their experience on the program? Oh, great. Thanks, Alira.
Hi everyone, I'm Alira Hudson-Gophers. I'm a regulatory affairs specialist at Cochlear. I also have a 10-week-old, so this program started when I was about to have a baby. and finished just after. So to be honest, when I was accepted and then saw when the dates were, I was really worried because it looked like a fantastic program, it was a fantastic program, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to do it. Women Lead Australia and HCL were incredibly accommodating, as was Peter, my mentor. And I think it really timed well because it gave me the chance to step away from the workplace and discuss what I was doing, where I was going, with someone completely independent who had a lot of very, very useful advice and useful experiences that really, I guess, meshed with what I wanted to do with my career. And so it was a really fantastic opportunity to have that wisdom that Peter shared, and also, I don't know, I think just to step back and really think about what all the different bits of my career were kind of joining together to become, because I think I felt that I was just doing things and, oh, that looks good, I'll go over there, and oh, that looks good, and I was kind of just zigzagging, around and then back in circles and not really knowing where I was going. So I think that's what the program's really helped with. I have a bit of a direction, a bit of a kick up the bum, as Ange said, and yeah, so I'm very, very grateful.
Thanks, Achariya. So I think it's fair to say that there's no silver bullet when it comes to addressing the gap and trying to do more to help women lead Australia. But I do hear lots of themes around social change, policy change and workplace change. And I think if all of us can take those three pillars back into our organisations and start asking questions about how do we support social change, policy change and workplace change, hopefully this problem won't exist 10 years from now for our daughters and our sons, and we as Women in Leadership Australia will fail to exist. But we thank very much our panellists for this evening. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and ideas. And thank you to those who shared their thoughts from the audience.